Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin can and string, we have our analyst and co-host. He is a writer for numerous blogs around the internet, including Cold Omaha and ESPN 1500 out of the Twin Cities. He is an exemplary employee of said building, and my understanding is you are also a useful human. Arif Hassan, how you doing, Arif?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I am a useful human. How are you?
You are a useful human. Hoodie wanted me to call you something else, but I'm just not comfortable with that yet.
We'll work it in eventually.
Eventually, we'll figure out a way to get all of your titles and accolades in here, and then 10 minutes into the show, we can start. It'll be fine. That'll be right around the time that we start listing everywhere that your work is appearing, and that seems more like an off-season show, quite frankly. So, welcome to this week's show. We have a lot to talk about. This show we will be covering the victory in Minneapolis, the greatest victory that has ever victored, the greatest thing that's ever happened in the new stadium. Plenty to talk about with that, with Sam Bradford, with AP going down, and we can also talk about Aaron Rodgers having the worst game of his career, which I just like saying that phrase. Can I say that again? Aaron Rodgers had the worst game of his career, according to Pro Football Focus. Oh, man, that heals my soul a little bit.
Yeah, it feels good.
Feels good. Well, we got plenty of stuff to talk about, but first thing first, we want to talk about our donations real quick. Just a reminder, this is a ad-free podcast. We don't shill any other products. We just like to talk about football and apparently coffee when I'm not on. And so if you like the show, if you hear value in this sort of product, if you can give to us in one of two different ways. You can go to norsecodepodcast.com, and we have a little donate button there. I believe it's paypal.me/norsecode. You can donate that way, or you can go through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/norsecode. We're just about 100 an episode, and we really appreciate it. This covers all of our expenses for the show. It makes it so that this is something that is truly for you guys. We don't have to worry about whether or not we can afford to keep the show going or something like that. This is something purely from you guys, and Patreon charges you every month just to make sure that we keep the lights on. And if you can spare Tree Fitty, we really would appreciate it if you help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. Speaking of Tree Fitty, we do have a new donation, a new Patreon helper from Peter Drummond. Thank you, Peter, for contributing your Tree Fitty and keeping the Loch Ness Monster at bay. Dusty gave him $1. Peter Drummond gave Tree Fitty. So we do appreciate it. Again, norsecodepodcast.com. There's the link over there for paypal.me/norsecode or patreon.com/norsecode. We really appreciate it, and we know that you guys appreciate not having to hear ad breaks in the middle of our shows. So, donate to the show. We really do appreciate it. And onwards and upwards to victory and a 2-0 start for the Minnesota Vikings. The Kings in the North, yet again. We are alone atop Mount Olympus in the NFC North standings. And it was a hell of a Sunday night game that, I don't mind telling you, I spent most of the time in the third and fourth quarter just going, we got plenty of time for Aaron Rodgers to throw this. Aaron Rodgers is just going to take it. And then Bradford's going to go down with a thumb injury, and it's just going to end horribly, all in tears. And somehow none of that ended up happening. We are still the Minnesota Vikings, right?
Yeah, I was actually expecting the Vikings immediately because like Bradford's left hand, they showed it on national TV. It looked really broken up. Thought there were broken bones in his left hand, and it was just like, oh, yeah, that's going to happen. And then, of course, kept on getting hit, and I think it was immediately after they showed his hand, and we were trying to figure out if he was going to be, a quarterback on the next series, and they come out. I think it was in Wildcat, so Bradford wasn't even on the field, and after that play, Bradford finally does come onto the field, and you're like, oh, okay, Bradford's going to be the quarterback. And then he immediately gets sacked, and it's slow to get up, and you're just like, oh, yeah, this seems like pretty Minnesota Vikings. That makes sense. But that didn't happen.
Did they slice his hand open and drain it? Like, is that what ended up happening, or has any word come out of what happened when he went out for his X-ray?
No, I haven't heard anything. Word might have come out, but I haven't heard anything about what happened with his hand afterwards. I know that I think it was Gene Bramwell said something like it was like a blood contusion or something based off of the video that we saw. But it's pretty difficult to tell. So, I mean, obviously it wasn't enough of an issue to keep him off the field, but this feels like an issue that could complicate itself if he keeps on getting hit and his hand lands in an awkward spot.
So we won. Our defense just chased Aaron Rodgers around all day. But the big headline out of the game is that Sam Bradford, it turns out, was fairly competent and ended up doing a heck of a job. Didn't turn the ball over, and he kept it close and dealt with Green Bay handily. It had a really nice pass in the red zone. What have we learned other than Justice may have been wrong after he asserted 60 times last episode that Sam Bradford wasn't worth a first-round pick?
We've learned both a lot of information and not very much information at once because it's just one game. But certainly there's no question that Bradford has the ability to ball out. And, we saw that in big ways. And I think that maybe the first instinct is to talk about the Green Bay defense, but that's not really fair. I think Bradford played a really good game. Demarius Randall was a really highly rated cornerback coming into the season and coming into the game. And Bradford was still able to make work over him. Clinton Diggs, who's performed a lot better than I expected he ever would. Just in general, he seemed to read the defense well and move those progressions, make accurate throws, all that jazz. I was a little bit worried sort of early on because, ball placement wasn't all that great. But, once he got in rhythm, I mean, certainly, Bradford did a great job. His touchdown throw to Stefon Diggs was amazing. He got rid of the ball before Diggs even broke open and threw him open in the end zone, which is a massively difficult throw because to throw someone open as they reach the end zone means you're not giving them very much space, and you still have to lead them with the ball. And he did a fantastic job there. So, I wouldn't say that there's any sort of long-term lessons. We'll still figure out later on in the season whether or not it was worth the trade. But certainly at the beginning, it's beginning to look like, I was wrong about, whether or not he was worth the trade. And that Justice was definitely wrong about, whether or not he was worth the trade. Because, I had characterized Bradford as the 20 to 25th best quarterback in the NFL. And he certainly played the best quarterback in the NFL, and it's very difficult for a quarterback, who's the 20 or 25th best quarterback to even have one game, that good. So certainly this changes our understanding of Bradford, I think. It changes our priors, how good could he be? And it shifts the conversation. If he's a top 10 quarterback, then, maybe that's worth a first-round pick over the course of a year and a half, 2 years, especially because the rest of the team is, really good. Yeah, I think it changes the conversation on what it's worth, but obviously we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to see, how he performs. You've got a pretty good defense, not a great secondary, because Kirk Coleman is actually bad and Josh Norman is gone, but a really good defense for Bradford to have to perform against in another test, and I think that that's going to give us, combined with this Green Bay game, sort of a wealth of information about, Sam Bradford and his fit within the offense.
It was just kind of amazing to watch. Everyone waited for the other foot to drop, and it never did. The closest that we came to panicking and just going, oh God, what the hell, was when he got hurt with it, when he hurt his hand. And then when we realized that it was his non-throwing hand that just looked ugly, and he came right away back in and made a couple of good throws, just is this really happening? Are we not going to crap the bed on national TV on a Sunday night?
Yeah, no, especially because, there's always, especially in the fourth quarter, there was always, a chance. So this is actually the problem. So Bradford played extremely well, but the offense didn't, move very well. They had a very low drive success rate. I think they were 4 of 14 on third down, 1 of 2 on fourth down. It's just well, crap. Like if your quarterback puts up like 120 plus rating, and honestly, it was closer to 125 than it was 121 because that last pass. Who cares about that last pass? It was designed to take clock off. You should score more than 17 points, right? But especially because the kick return game was fine, right? It wasn't like you're like backed up to the 1 yard line, and the defense didn't put you in bad field position, and Locke was punting extremely well. So why the hell wasn't the offense putting up points? And it turns out, the run game was so abysmal that it kept Green Bay in the game. That's like a really weird thing to say, but Green Bay's held to 14 points, and the running backs can't do anything. And it was really weird because I was tracking how many times Adrian Peterson was up against, a certain number of defenders in the box and stuff like that and how he was doing. And in that tracking, I noticed that his first 7 plays, 57% of his first 7 plays were successful against Tennessee. And then the final 7 plays he had in Green Bay were successful. Not explosive successful, just like barely the amount required to be successful, at 87 or 82% or something like that. No, it was 85 actually, so it was split the difference. It was 85% of those plays were successful. And in between those 2 sets of 7, 5% of his plays were successful. So very early on, the Vikings were set back by a 5 yard loss, a 1 yard loss, a 2 yard gain, etc. And that created some really bad situations for the offense. Bradford, I think, had to throw from 3rd and 12 plus 3 times. They counted for 40 of his passing yards. If you got rid of it, his pass rating's still like 114, so it's not like that's the reason his pass rating was so high. But the offense should have done better, which not Bradford's fault, maybe the offensive line's fault. And because of that, Green Bay was in the game, and it always felt like the Green Bay was like a play away, which I guess technically speaking they were, but it just felt like Green Bay was going to be a play away because of the way that Aaron Rodgers plays, especially because over the last 10 or so games, like the entire offense Green Bay has put together has been Aaron Rodgers miracle throws, and hey, they set up a situation for an Aaron Rodgers miracle throw. So it definitely felt like the Vikings were about to take one in the teeth in their own stadium in the most gut-wrenching way possible.
It had all the makings of the New York Giants going into Jerry World and opening up with a win and writing in Sharpie on the wall. Like it just had the makings of that, and somehow we ended up surviving it. Just an interesting series of events. And Bradford wasn't bad, and the run game though. Let's just get the Adrian Peterson news out of the way first. Adrian did not run well. He kept seeing the same look and just couldn't accumulate. I think he had 6 rushes until he actually made it to positive yardage. And then he started building up a little bit. He had 2 good runs in a row, and then he went out. Let's talk about the injury, what we've heard about time frame on it, and whether or not this team gets a little more open with Jerick McKinnon behind and ready.
Yeah, I'm wondering sort of like if the running offense changes at all. So, first things first, the news in Adrian Peterson said he's a torn meniscus. Looks like there's no ACL damage. And I think that he'll probably miss a couple of weeks. So we've got 2 examples of running backs who've played an entire season with a torn meniscus. And I had mistakenly assumed that Arian Foster had torn his meniscus, I think, in 2012. But that's actually like a groin injury. He actually tore it in 2010, which was his best year ever. Arian Foster, and he's the kind of running back that also, he did well in his own running scheme. He had an excellent offensive line. He was a very, very good pass catcher, especially on 3rd down. So there's a lot of things that contributed to it that are not quite true for Adrian, who's not really in his own running scheme anymore. But it's still hopeful. But then you think about Chris Johnson, the worst year of his career was when he was playing through a torn meniscus. I think the Vikings are probably just going to let him rest for a couple of weeks and see what happens. I know that with Carolina coming up, that's a pretty important game, not just because it's a good team, but because it's an in-conference team that you're going to have to beat if you want to make good on the gamble that you made. And I don't think that they want to sideline Adrian for the year, which is another option. And they could even have a surgery, right? And that'll probably take him out for 4 months. They don't want to sideline him for the year because, like, if you've got an opportunity to use him, and you're probably not going to bring him back next year anyway. From a completely like selfish perspective and like a team focused perspective, you might as well get the best out of him while you can, and then use this as leverage to have him reduce his contract for next year or get rid of him. And the Vikings have invested a lot into this season, and I don't want to get into the sunk cost fallacy, but I think that you can make the most of your investment by only sitting Adrian for about 2 or 3 weeks. So that's all like. That's what we have for now. And then you have to figure out sort of McKinnon and Asiata. I find it kind of interesting that the national conversation, fantasy-wise, is trying to figure out whether or not you pick McKinnon or Asiata. To me, it's pretty obvious. I think that you pick McKinnon. I think the fact that the Vikings even used him in the red zone, more often, this year than Asiata, I think is a clear indication that they favor McKinnon. But they'll probably go by a running back by committee, and then wouldn't be surprised if Asiata vultured a few touchdowns. But I think it's pretty clear that McKinnon is going to significantly out-touch Asiata at this point. But yeah, I think that if they don't bring in like so many extra blockers, I think that's probably a good thing. Like, the Vikings brought in, extra blocker once, 2 extra blockers a ton of times, 3 extra blockers, more than I think probably the rest of the league, and even had 4 extra blockers in the box on 1 or 2 occasions. And they weren't necessarily all that great. Those situations that brought 8, 9 defenders into the box, not because it's Adrian Peterson, but because you have so many blockers in the box that it's kind of dumb to have not defenders in the box. That's where all the offense is, and it created sort of a crowded situation. I think that both McKinnon and Asiata would benefit from like only having 6 blockers ahead of them instead of 7 or 8. And I don't know if that's what the Vikings are going to do, but I think that maybe there's some hope that they will, because I think that's a really good situation for both of them as runners.
It's interesting that you mentioned the whole fantasy thing, and anybody who pays attention to the Vikings at all knows that McKinnon is going to be the one that you want to end up picking up. Asiata may end up being a red zone back, but quite honestly, we haven't really made it that deep into the red zone lately. So is that something that you really want to gamble on? But anybody who knows anything about the Vikings knows that if AP went down, that McKinnon's the guy that you're going to want to pick up anyway. And because this is a torn meniscus surgery that could loom, it's pretty much just shaving down the meniscus that you currently have for it. So is this something that will, if we were to bring him back next year or have him come back later in the season, how would this affect his running, his cutting, and all of that?
Yeah, I don't really know. I wish I knew, like, sort of like what the impact of a torn meniscus is on like a return running back in terms of the specific skills that they have. Intuitively, like one of the great things about Adrian Peterson, they actually showed in the Green Bay game, didn't so much in the Tennessee game. He actually showed in the Green Bay game, his ability to like jump cut, right? Intuitively you think like, hey, maybe that's a problem. That seems like it puts a lot of load on the knee. It also kind of depends on the athlete. For example, Steph Curry, he avoided injury sort of the second half of his career because he changed, the energy being loaded at his ankles and moved it all the way up to his hips somehow, which is biomechanically like pretty important in terms of, making sure that he doesn't keep getting injured. I don't know how Adrian Peterson runs, but his ankles go under a lot of strain, and his ankles have been fine throughout, his career. His knees probably go through a lot of strain. That's been sort of the only question mark. And so the question is, like, when he engages in these moves, these like jump cuts and just cutting, what's getting stressed? My guess is that, the plant knee is the one that's getting stressed, and maybe that's going to be, at issue when you've got, recovering meniscus, or maybe not at all. Maybe it'll impact his power, or maybe there's not going to be much of a discernible effect. I wish I knew more. I'm sure that, we'll get some listeners who have like a better understanding of like the way that athletes run in response to injury, and specifically the function of meniscus within a knee and how it can impact running. I'm sure we'll get those comments, and those will be fun to read. But I don't know, like, what we'll see. I mean, again, Arian Foster, great season on a torn meniscus. Chris Johnson, terrible season on a torn meniscus.
I know that when I destroyed my knee a few years ago, this would have been close to 4 years ago now, I ended up with a torn meniscus, and we opted to not do surgery and instead just let it heal. And I got the opportunity. I was given the opportunity to have it shaved down, but it didn't make any sense at the time. I'm not an athlete, but I will say that it took a couple of years for the walking to finally like not feel strange. So I imagine that the addition of exercise and running, it's still going to take a little bit of time to get used to the whole I'm running on this thing, but. It is too bad. Adrian is Adrian is gone for the moment. Timetable. What did Zimmer say the timetable was for his return? It was questionable, but it was something like a month or so, right?
For Adrian?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we don't actually know because his time frame is kind of dependent on what the Vikings feel like. They said that they won't make a decision on an Adrian until game day, which who knows if they're playing games again. Like any opportunity they have to like play games with who the starter is going to be, I guess they're going to take it. But they said that they're going to feel things out, so we don't know if he's going to return on Sunday. Like it's possible that he just plays.
That Purple Jesus just rises again, and that's the end of that. I suppose stranger things have happened. Sam Bradford started a game and won it. So
right, exactly.
This season, all bets are off. So Adrian didn't do well. He started to build up a little bit, finally got a couple of yards, and then ended up going out. And then McKinnon came in. Do we have any comment on McKinnon's performance to start off?
I didn't track his running specifically, but like overall, he didn't have a particularly great performance. I think he had more yards over expectation. That's yards given sort of the down and distance that you're in than Adrian or Asiata, but just generally speaking, he was a less successful running back than either of the two. I think, if I remember correctly, McKinnon had one successful run out of I think 6 or something like that. So. I wasn't a huge fan of their performance with McKinnon in there. I thought actually Adrian was performing a little bit better, which it hurts me to say because I've been like banging the table for McKinnon to start and stuff like that, especially with Adrian, struggling as he was before he got injured. But I'm kind of excited to see sort of how week 3 develops in terms of McKinnon and Asiata. Asiata was probably the best running back out of the 3.
That really does say something. And I was kind of surprised when Asiata got brought in. I thought, okay, well, we're trying to kill the clock here, so he's going to do 3 yards fall, 3 yards fall, 3 yards fall. And then he ended up breaking that one, and now he has the longest run in U.S. Bank Stadium history. He may only have that for a week, but he has it. He can hold his head high and say, I have the longest run in U.S. Bank Stadium history. So we covered the quarterback play. We covered the running backs. Let's talk Stefon Diggs being the number 1 receiver in the NFL this week. Has the most yards of any wide receiver week 1 and 2. Hell of a player.
Yeah, no, he's been fantastic. And the interesting thing about Stefon Diggs is that, you could say that he's the number 1 receiver as a result of the total yards that he's had. And I'm not a huge fan of total yards as a statistic, unless it favors my team, because I did retweet that NFL tweet. But
you Paul Allen style homer.
Yeah, you know me. But if you take a look at a lot of, sort of more advanced statistics, for example, yards per route run, which is the best, I think, production per opportunity statistic that exists for wide receivers, you probably also have to combine it with, like, percent market share of the offense and stuff like that. But yards per route run, he's leading the league by a significant margin. That's probably going to come down unless he averages 150 yards a game. He's the top receiver by almost any receiving metric, simple or complex, and that's fantastic. It's a result of a lot of the things that he worked on sort of as a rookie that he kind of showcased, but has really kind of excelled at so far this year. It's not just that. And what's crazy about him is that when you watch receivers like sort of on all 22, Stevie Johnson and to some extent Antonio Brown, it's really easy to tell why they're good route runners. And the reason for that is because I don't want to say they're flashy, but their moves are just more obvious from the camera. It's they step out and they step back in, and the crazy thing about Antonio Brown is that he can maintain his timing when he does that, when he engages in head fakes and shoulder fakes and foot fakes. Whereas like Stevie Johnson doesn't really maintain his timing throughout the route, which is why he's a good fit for some quarterbacks, not for others. But Diggs is a lot more, and I think that he comps better to Brown overall better, but the way that he seems to run routes seems a little bit more sort of Michael Crabtree, where you can't really tell why he's always open, but he's definitely always open. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the way that he runs routes, I mean, it's just like he drives over his knees, which always makes the threat of the go route there. It tricks defensive backs all the time. And what was interesting is that in the Tennessee game, you saw on the All-22, you saw they were in cover 4, or they were in cover 6, which is half cover 4, half cover 2. And one of the safety that was lined up over Diggs thought he was going deep and had pointed deep and started backpedaling. And the cornerback that was over Diggs, that was in sort of a cover 4 zone, started thinking that Diggs was going up and out, and so he started widening up a little bit to deal with an up and out sluggo route. And Diggs was running a comeback, and he didn't look like he was doing anything. I mean, he just ran upfield and ran back, and both defensive backs were wildly out of position because they misread the route. And it has everything to do with the fact that he puts weight on a particular foot, and you can't necessarily see it from the film, but that defensive backs, when they're lined up against him, can see sort of, oh, he's emphasizing moving in this direction. It's almost kind of unconscious, and it's hard to stop yourself from reacting to it. And he just moves them out of position with a move that you can't necessarily see, or it could be like an eye fake or a shoulder fake, and suddenly he's open, and that's great. But if that was all that he could do, then he would just be a faster Michael Crabtree, right? But he's a lot more than that. He's got a great catch radius. He's been winning all these contested catches against these defensive backs, which I expect that's probably not going to continue at the rate that it's happening. That's probably going to regress down a little bit. But he's got great strong hands. He's got great ball tracking, phenomenal ball tracking. Like that's one of the most important things about his ability deep, and he's got great hands and a great catch radius. All of those things together make him a very complete receiver that has the ability to win, on short routes for yards after the catch, on intermediate routes, which require him to either go over the middle in order to win a contested ball or to have really sharp route running, or deep routes where he's got to have a lot of speed. He's had sort of all of those elements together that have made him, a really phenomenal receiver for the Vikings.
It's been really fun to watch, and just looking at the box score, it's pretty obvious who he wanted to be throwing to. We had Diggs with 11 targets, 9 receptions. Adam Thielen, 5 targets, 4 receptions. Rudolph, 8 targets, 3 receptions for 31 yards. Rudolph does, however, have the first touchdown in US Bank Stadium from the Vikings.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think if you got rid of throwaways, you'd get rid of both of the incompletions that are targeted at Stefon Diggs and that ESPN box score. One of the ones to Rudolph, and I think actually the one to Adam Thielen. So I think he may have been 4 for 4 to Thielen, 9 for 9 to Diggs, and 3 for 7 to Rudolph. Which, I mean, that's even more stunning, honestly. But yeah, I tried figuring out sort of what his passer rating be when he was not throwing to Diggs. So when he threw to Diggs, his pass rating was like north of 140, which makes sense, especially if you say it's 9 for 9 instead of 9 for 11. And that's kind of astounding. And then you're like, well, what about everybody else? And it was actually still pretty good. It was like 115. So it wasn't a huge drop off throwing to anyone else, but it certainly was pretty significant that he targeted Diggs 9 times. More significant that Diggs caught it 9 times. It's easy to make him your favorite receiver because he's always open. He's always available, right? Adam Thielen, I don't really know what kind of route runner he is, and I've been trying to figure this out for a while because people always ask about Adam Thielen. And I think he might be turning into, maybe not Brandon Marshall, but kind of a possession receiver that, he's got a lot of speed, but he doesn't tend to use it all the time. He's got a ton of agility. He doesn't tend to use it all the time. And he's a relatively rough route runner, but he can win contested catches, which is 2 years ago I would not have said that about him. So it's kind of interesting to see Adam Thielen develop as a receiver. But I can see why he's getting targeted more than, say, Charles Johnson, who's on the field more often than him, or on occasion, more than Kyle Rudolph. But yeah, it's interesting. Right now, Bradford seems to be trusting receivers that, Rudolph, Thielen, Diggs, that are, I don't want to say reliable because it's he's trusting receivers that are reliable, but can get you out of sticky situations if the throw happens to be bad. And I think that kind of characterizes all 3 of them.
Here's my favorite stat of the week so far. When you look at the box score, you can see that somebody that we ragged on last week, Charles Johnson, ended up with 2 catches, 2 targets. So less targets to him, and he caught both of them. Good job.
Yeah, good job, Charles. Charles is in charge.
That's where we're going. That's where we're going with that.
That's where we went.
I'm so ashamed. But speaking of something a little shameful, what was going on with the fumble recoveries that were going on? There was a lot of fumble luck on Green Bay's part until we finally ended up breaking through and grabbing it. Was it a result of players trying to scoop up the ball instead of falling on it, or was something else at play here?
Yeah, I think some of it's luck, some of it's trying to scoop and score. What's interesting is that statistically the Vikings weren't too much a benefactor of or the Packers weren't too much a benefactor of fumble luck because it's officially a recorded fumble recovery for Andrew Sendejo, and then a fumble by Andrew Sendejo that was then recovered by the Packers. So they recovered something like 2 of 5 instead of 1 of 4. But yeah, I think both like, hey, these players just happen to be near the ball at the time, and also the ball is funny shaped, and also trying to scoop and score. I think both of those things, the luck and the scoop and score tendency, were at play. I just don't mind it. I think that in most seasons, most years, most players, I absolutely mind it. I'm just like, just fall on the ball. I don't really just fall on the ball. But I think in a situation where I don't have a ton of confidence in the offense to consistently score points, and again, they only scored 3 times in this game, despite a phenomenal performance by the quarterback. I'm totally okay with it. Like the defense outscored the offense. I think last week it was like 14-12 defense versus the Vikings offense last week, and I think at the point when Andrew Sendejo scooped it up, the Vikings had 7, and the Packers may have had 7. I don't really quite remember, but certainly it was a situation where you're like, well, I have no idea if the Vikings will continue to score. Might as well sort of create plays on my own. And so yeah, I think that's all at play. I think that per usual fumble luck will even itself out, but this time sort of in the Vikings' favor. I was tweeting about this earlier, but if you take a look at all of the opportunities the Vikings have had to create turnovers and have generated based a result of like things like the pressure that they've created and the way that they're stripping the ball and stuff like that, they've created an extraordinary number of turnover opportunities because it was, I think it's something like 6 total forced fumbles by the Vikings defense, plus 2 interceptions and a dropped interception and an interception that was called back due to penalty. That's probably not sustainable. You're probably not going to end up with like 5 turnover opportunities a game. But that's really incredible to see. Like if you assume that, maybe I actually have no idea I could probably calculate it really quickly by looking at Kean Fay's pre-snap reads book. But if you take a look at how many interceptions are caught versus how many are dropped, I'm sure, it's higher than 50%. I'm sure it's somewhere close to like 2/3 or maybe even 3/4. If it's something like 60-70% and fumbles are 50%, then you'd have to think that the Vikings are capable of generating 3 turnovers a game based off of sort of the absurd 5 turnover a game opportunity that they've had. That's going to be interesting to watch forward. I think that you're going to see a lot of players head to the Pro Bowl as a result of that. If that's the case, because that's probably what kept Harrison out of the voting for a while. That's what's kept Everson Griffin maybe out of the voting for a while. We'll see, but yeah, the Vikings are doing a really good job creating turnovers. It just didn't turn into actual turnovers very often in this game until the very end with the Trey Waynes interception and the fumble. I think it was Brian Robinson caused the fumble that was eventually recovered by the Vikings. It's astounding. It's frustrating that it hasn't turned into as many turnovers as it should have. In quotes. But yeah, the Vikings are the defense is setting themselves up to be the number 1 in the league right now. I think by DVOA they're number 3. It depends on sort of how opponent adjustments will continue throughout the season and how the defense continues to perform throughout the season. But I said this defense was not really a top 5 defense last year. It was a top 10 defense, but it had the potential to hit top 5 this year, and this is kind of what it looks like, which is really exciting.
So this whole I have to ask. So the interception that pretty much sealed the game. Trey Waynes wanted to get all those penalties so it looked like he was a weak corner, right? Like, this was totally planned by Trey Waynes to be like, no, keep picking on me. Keep picking. Oh, yep, now I got it. Now I'm going to bring the ball back. Like, this was all planned by Trey Waynes, right? This was some elaborate ruse by him, right?
I'm not so sure that's the case because you did get benched for, I think, 6 snaps. So maybe not. But if it was, masterful plan. The problem is I think that Trey Waynes So the game was good for Trey Waynes' development. It was also good for the Vikings in general in terms of Trey Waynes' development because it provided another very obvious, almost sports movie type lesson about, amnesia and, building confidence and stuff like that and whatever. But I think that from a performance perspective in that specific game, Waynes, I think, did net much worse than he did better. I think he gave up 98 yards in coverage. He gave up additional penalty yards, 2 pass interference penalties, and a holding penalty. And a lot of people thought that those were BS calls. I actually disagree. I thought they were correctly called, and a touchdown. And if he had done better on half of those plays that he'd done poorly on, they don't need an interception, right? Because on that drive alone, for example, they converted a 3rd down on Trey Waynes. And, if he doesn't give up that touchdown because of the way that he wasn't covering anybody, then, the Packers wouldn't have been in a situation where a comeback victory was possible or, any number of other situations because he gave up, a bunch of receptions on 3rd down. He's really lucky that Jared Cook, didn't convert when he had the converted yardage. He just ran backwards for a second so the Vikings could prevent that from happening. He got kind of lucky there. So, for the most part, if he had played better, he wouldn't have needed to have that interception, but it's good that he had it, and I think that going forward, it's good that game happened, and the Vikings could have come away with a win while that game happened. So, a bunch of sort of mixed takes, but I guess that's how football works.
That's definitely how Trey Wayne's play was anyway. A bunch of mixed, but it ended well, so there was that. Robinson had a really good move in, got the ball out. Man, I don't think I've ever seen Aaron Rodgers fumble that much.
Yeah, he's been very good at avoiding turnovers both in the air and on the ground. How many fumbles did he have? 2? 3? It was pretty bad.
He had 3 fumbles. It was amazing. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. And the text messages I was receiving from Green Bay fans were pretty epic in nature. Right around the 3rd fumble, when we finally recovered the bastard, it was nice. It was just it was fun to see him.
So you're ours now.
Yeah, finally this is ours now. That the defense is going to just bring this back. It'll be fun.
I think that was my tweet. Actually, I just tweeted the word finally. So total fumbles in Aaron Rodgers' career. So. Not quite true that he's been good at avoiding fumbles. In 2014, he had 12 fumbles, and in 2008, 2009, he had 10 fumbles each. But in 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2015, he had below double-digit fumbles. He's currently leading the league. I'm sure he's tied, but currently leading the league in fumbles. 3 over the course of 2 games, or 3 in 1 game, I guess, is maybe a more accurate statement, is well above sort of his career rate. 65 fumbles in 121 starts is about half a fumble per game, which is a little high, but not that high for quarterbacks. And recently we're used to seeing an Aaron Rodgers who, except for 1 season, going all the way back to 2010, was really good at avoiding fumbles, even though he was not that great at avoiding sacks, and obviously, very good at avoiding interceptions. Both of those things were not the case, and I'm sure the fumble thing is probably going to die down because, 3 fumbles in 1 game, that's probably not going to repeat itself. But, it's kind of interesting to see for it. If Aaron Rodgers is washed, maybe he's just washed. Maybe that's it. If he's not, he's probably going to throw a couple more interceptions this year just because that offense is just not very well designed right now.
Yeah, does anybody strike less fear into the hearts of the NFL than Santa Claus impersonator bearded Mike McCarthy? Does anybody is anybody less terror-inspiring than maybe Andy Reid? Andy Reid and the play sheet that looks like a barbecue menu.
Well, if Bill Musgrave ever became a head coach, it would be him. But other than that, I think he leads, with Mike Smith gone from Atlanta. I think he leads the league in uninspiring.
Uninspiring and certainly not fear inspiring. Like just wow. As soon as they showed him on the sidelines with the attempted Santa beard, just dude, some people can rock it, some people can't. You should put that away.
Right, like normally I'm pro beard, obviously, but I think that they tend to look good on people most of the time. Like obviously some exceptions, Andrew Luck, but
he just has that Civil War general thing going for him. It's his look. It's fine.
But yeah, I feel like maybe he's one of those rare individuals that does not look that great with a beard.
Just tragic to look at. Also, Davante Adams. Worst receiver in the league, or just worst on his team?
I think someone put out there that Davante Adams is the worst receiver receiving significant game snaps. That might be true. He had a pretty up and down game. So statistically, he had a pretty good game against Jacksonville. I think that if you just watched him the entire game against Jacksonville, you'd be like, wow, what an ass. He did not have that great of a game. And then obviously against the Vikings, he did not have that great of a game. Maybe the worst receiver who's receiving starting snaps.
Yeah, uninspiring there too. Just there was a throw to it wasn't to Adams. It was to their tight end right near the end of the game, and just the tight end just looked at Rodgers like a dog who's just been shown a card trick. Just head slightly turned. Just what did you just throw at me? I don't understand. There's a football. I don't. Exactly. Just the slight head turn, and really, we're playing football here. Don't get me wrong. It was great fun to watch. Like, hilarious fun. I recommend it to a friend, but still, that was a little strange. So, what did our defense do to beat Aaron Rodgers?
I think a lot of it has to do with just defensive line pressure. I think that Linval Joseph had an amazing game. I think that, Danielle Hunter showed up. I think that Brian Robinson was able to convert pressure into sacks. It's been a problem his entire career. And I think that the front four in general, along with contributions from Tom Johnson, who's not starting, Shamar Stephen, who technically was starting, I think that all of that, played a big role. I think the fact that James Starks, he had 7 runs, 0 of them were successful. I think that played a big role. I think that, their ability to get pressure on Aaron Rodgers, who, by the way, was actually only pressured 25 times. The Vikings converted that pressure into 5 sacks. That played a big role. Their ability to generate those turnovers played a big role. I think that, there's something to be said like, hey, Green Bay is just not there. Like, Green Bay just is not who they used to be. Aaron Rodgers hasn't cracked a 100 pass rating in the past 14 games. Maybe there's something there too. But I think the Vikings just in general demonstrated, extremely sound run defense principles. I think that, just the defensive line in general did such a great job plugging up the run. The defensive, backfield, or I guess the linebackers did a great job staying disciplined to the run. I thought Anthony Barr had a phenomenal game. Was kind of underrated, but he was able to move, running backs out of the box and stuff like that, and that allowed people to clean up. I just think that for the most part, the front 7 played an extremely sound game. Harrison Smith played another game where he wasn't targeted once. Some of that has to do with the fact that he was a single high safety, and they tend to get less targets than like a box safety or anything like that. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that on the rare occasions the Packers did send someone deep that they weren't, going to be able to do much, so the Packers had to settle for a bunch of short passes, and the Vikings were a very good tackling team. And so that, contributed in a lot of ways to, the Vikings being able to make sure that, the Packers didn't get too much yardage in the situations where they had those. I think that some of it has to do with the Packers' poor offensive play calling. Some of it has to do with the poor Packers personnel. But a lot of it just has to do with really solid play up front.
So before we go to the mailbag, Tommy Gunn had a really good question for us, and it's very simple. Please respond to the pundits that are convinced that the Packers beat themselves and that the Vikings were not involved at all. Okay, thanks, bye.
Yeah, I think we just did. So I actually also answered this question on, I think it was a podcast appearance for Inside the Pylon. I think that there's like a good argument to be had that, the Packers beat themselves, but I think that the argument is only important insofar as maybe the Packers aren't good anymore. And I think that that's a useful way to forward that argument. But I think that if you're talking about the receiver defensive back matchup, I think that the issue there was that the Packers were playing poorly more than the Vikings defensive backs were playing well. But I think you're talking about up front. The Packers have a very good offensive line. I think the Vikings defensive line was just better. And so I think that has much more to do with it. I think that, Rodgers maybe struggled under pressure, but it's difficult to get 5 sacks with an offense beating itself. I think that in this case, you can reliably say that the Vikings defense played better than the Packers offense played poorly, except in the receiver defensive back game.
And before we end it, I suppose we could talk about Patterson making that great run, that great return in the fourth quarter that set up our ability to just kill some clock time. This is not. He was involved in a couple of different plays during the game anyway, but is this just all we're going to end up seeing from him for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that the Vikings showed some faith in Patterson in the very first game by having him run real routes, even caught a catch. He did well on that catch because it was a contested catch. It was a difficult catch. They got him a little bit involved in this game with Wildcat. I think it was McKinnon to Patterson. I think it was McKinnon in the Wildcat. That was kind of fun to see. It was a 5-yard loss. So, who knows? But I think that we're going to see a little bit more of Patterson. I think the Vikings are really just going to try and find a bunch of ways to relieve pressure from their quarterback. Because now that Adrian Peterson is gone, I don't know if this is as important as the Vikings might think. They have a higher opinion of Peterson's running ability than I do. But with Peterson gone, now you've got, one fewer opportunity to find ways to relieve pressure on the quarterback. And I think that, running screens and having those quick plays and even some gadget plays and stuff like that, I think that's a really good way to relieve pressure on the quarterback. And I think the Vikings are probably thinking that, especially because, that's the whole point of Patterson. They can produce a quarter of Percy Harvin's 2012, then they're going to try. So I think that we're going to see more of Patterson. Obviously, those kick returns that he had this year so far have all been phenomenal. I'm kind of surprised he hasn't returned one. I think it was in this game. He was about to break one, but I think it was a poor block either by Thielen or Sendejo that knocked him loose, and so he wasn't able to actually get that touchdown. But he's really close. He's kind of like Adrian Peterson back in 2012 when we were just is he going to break one? He didn't break one. Is he going to break one? He didn't break one. Is he going to break one? He didn't break one. Oh my God, he broke one. I think that's kind of where Patterson is with kick returns, that he's just so close to breaking one for a touchdown. And it's not 61 yards. It's not like you're going to be crap, but it'll be fun to see those turn into touchdowns.
All right, let's start with the mailbag, and let's open it up here. And our first question for the mailbag is a nice one. It's from Matt MB99 on Twitter, who asks, "Are we sure the Packers are good?"
We are not sure. In fact, I saw a couple of people I very much respect say that the Packers' defense is actually better than their offense, and I think that's a bad sign. Not because their defense is awful, but it's because we know what the identity of the Packers should be, given who the Packers have been for the past 7 years. The defense is thin, right? They've got a lot of problems, especially when LaTroy Guion was out for a couple of snaps. They've got a lot of problems up front. Mike Daniels is extremely good. We saw that. But, behind him, they just don't have much. They don't have a lot of good inside linebackers. In fact, I think they only have 3 inside linebackers on the roster, and they're all very, very young. They've got one good edge rusher and a situational edge rusher in Julius Peppers. They've got, a bunch of really young players in the secondary. And so, there's a lot of mistakes to be had on the defense, and the offense is just, it seems to be designed very poorly. They're playing very conservatively. They're throwing very conservatively. I mentioned this a couple of times. A couple of people have said this on Twitter. I think it was Ian Kenyon who said on Twitter that the entire offense might just be Aaron Rodgers' miracle plays because outside of that, they just haven't been generating very much. They're very Yak reliant, but they're not very Randall Cobb reliant, which you think if they were, reliant on yards after the catch, that they'd get their best yards after the catch receiver of the ball. But, Davante Adams is demanding a large role. That's very bad for them. Aaron Rodgers is playing the worst he's played in his career. That's obviously very bad for them. And Eddie Lacy continues to be fat. That's Packers are not that good, maybe.
Lacy got fat on burgers and fries. Sorry, old Subway commercial for some reason ended up coming to me there. Scruffy the Janitor, Scruffy the J at Twitter, asks, was the noise on offense because there were a lot of Packers fans or because the Vikings fans were too excited? Was there some irrational exuberance going on there?
I wish I knew the answer. I can't tell you, the duh answer, but I'm going to guess, evidently there were just not as many Packers fans as a lot of people expected in that stadium. So I'm going to guess it's just people were super excited. I mean, they were beating the Packers. They were doing it in their new stadium. There was an amazing halftime tribute to Prince. People were pretty hyped up.
The Prince tribute is what did it. Let's just be honest. People just couldn't handle themselves after the Purple Rain stuff.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Yeah. Scruffy also asks, was Diggs' performance exclusive to having Adrian playing and taking away attention?
No, I mean, Diggs performed after Adrian was out, too. So I think that this thing about Adrian demanding attention from defenders, I think it's overblown, especially this year. So I have logged every situation that Adrian Peterson's run the ball. So obviously 31 carries this year. And I've logged the number of blockers and the number of defenders in the box. And the average is actually, the difference is actually on average about half, which is interesting because most of the time defenses will have, regardless of who the running back is, unless it's a receiver probably, but regardless of who the running back is, they'll have an extra defender for the number of blockers in the box. So if they've got, two tight ends in there, there's usually 8 defenders in the box. It's usually a 4-3 defense. If you've got 2 tight ends and a fullback in there, that means you've got 8 blockers in the box. They'll probably bring 9 in to the box. They'll bring a safety in to account for that extra gap. They'll always try to have another blocker or another defender than you'll have blockers in order to win the running back math. And there's never been a situation so far this season where an opposing team had more than one defender in the box than there were blockers. So I don't think there's been a situation where the Vikings could reliably say, hey, Stefon Diggs is in a true one-on-one situation because Adrian Peterson has pulled so many defenders into the box. There's usually been, you've got a deep safety and a corner on Stefon Diggs or something like that. It hasn't been because the Vikings have demanded more. There's been one situation where the Vikings had 9 blockers, but I think that was, that was blocked up by 9. There's just never been a situation where the opponent had 9 blockers in the box and the Vikings had fewer than 8. And there's never been a situation where the opponent had 8 defenders in the box and the Vikings had fewer than 7. So I don't think that's the reason.
Next question is from Matt Nelson, who has a 2-part question. He asks, when will our DBs figure out that A, how to catch a ball thrown to them, and B, press coverage without drawing all those nasty flags?
Seems like they're better at the catching thing. It's been a while since we could say that, so maybe they figured it out. Trey Waynes doesn't have a lot of career interceptions, even going back to his time in Michigan State.
He still has more than Chris Cook. I do just want to point that out.
Yeah, he has more than Chris Cook. Mackenzie Alexander, he did get that interception in the preseason, but for the most part has been interception-free during the regular season of his career. And Terrence Newman, you're pretty good at getting picks. I dropped a pick, obviously, in the first game. So maybe a problem, but honestly, it was they've been pretty good at corralling in those interceptions. The second part, the press coverage thing, that's basically just Trey Waynes. I mean, Terrence Newman did have a really, really bad pass interference penalty. Thought that was a little bit less legitimate than some of the stuff that was on Trey Waynes. But for the most part, I mean, he's been playing pretty well. In fact, actually, after his biggest penalty, which brought them to the goal line, I think Newman was targeted 5 more times and only allowed 1 more reception. So he actually played really well. So yeah, I mean, maybe if Xavier Rhodes was healthy, this isn't even a conversation. So I'm a little bit less upset about those 2 specific things, but yeah, Trey Waynes has got to figure it out.
Yeah. Next question from Luke, whose last name I will butcher. So we're just not going to do that. Told Shujev? Let's go with that. Loke has a question that asks, is Tony Sparano actually capable of fixing the O-line?
No. I don't think there's any way to fix it with personnel. They just have to play better. Like, I know people want a solution, and I'm just going to repeat what I said, which was wrong when I said it, but right now, I swear to God. But, not all problems have solutions. I mean, I don't know. It's just the offensive line depth in the league is really bad. Maybe at some point you're just like, hey, Zach Kieran, you've played guard for a long time now. You were a center in college. You were a center for a first year in the NFL. Now it's time to play guard. Maybe. I don't see it happening. They could promote Nick Easton to center and move Berger to guard, and maybe that solves that problem. Who knows? But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like they just have to play better. It's just so difficult to fix an offensive line problem midway through the season.
Yeah. Next question is from Matt MB99, who asks, "What's keeping Treadwell from seeing significant playing time?" I'm going to guess that's the lack of injuries to the wide receivers.
Yeah, I think. The question is really like, why hasn't Treadwell beaten out Charles Johnson and Adam Thielen, and that's maybe a more important question. But the Vikings are obviously like very hesitant to play rookies. I know Stefon Diggs is a fifth rounder, so it's not a very good comparison. But he didn't start until week 5. Trey Waynes didn't start last year. There are counter examples, right? Anthony Barr played right away, but for the most part, they seem to be pretty okay just waiting on rookies. Mackenzie Alexander, for example, got a couple of snaps, and then they got rid of him, even though he played all right. So it's just a waiting game. He's super young. Treadwell is like 20. I think he's 21 now, but I think he was 20 at the time of the draft. So it's not like he doesn't have just like an amount of time ahead of him, and he's got a lot to learn until he gets there. So I think the Vikings are just fine sitting on him. But yeah, I think this isn't really a reason for alarm, but it is. It's worth the questions, right? Like, I'm not saying like, hey, stop asking this question. It's worth the question because he's a first-round pick. The Vikings don't really have a lot of confidence, or at least Vikings fans don't really have a lot of confidence in the secondary receiver options. And you've got this player right there that you spent a bunch of draft capital on, a first-round pick on to get. But I don't think it's that big of a concern.
Next question is from Troy, who asks, any advanced metrics to tell us when Bradford will be dead if line play continues as is?
InjuryPredictor.com said that Bradford has like a 41% chance of getting injured this season, which is lower than 50, so that's pretty good. Pretty high injury rate, though, I think, for a quarterback. And I think that because Injury Predictor just says, hey, you've had this many injuries in the past, you may have this many injuries in the future, it doesn't take into account the total number of hits that a quarterback is going to take, or total number of sacks. With more sacks, obviously, because there are more opportunities to get injured. And I think that if you're, a 40 sack, or your team that gives up 40 sacks versus a team that gives up 60 sacks, which would be a lot, then your opportunities for a relatively fragile quarterback increase really, really significantly. I'm looking up another website that tries to predict injury history or injury likelihood.
I was about to call BS on the injurypredictor.com, but no, that is a legit thing. I'm bothered and amazed that such a site just exists like this. Injury prediction, in NFL player injury history. If only you could gamble on something like this. Perhaps you can?
You could probably call a bookie and work something out.
Yeah, probably. I was wondering what the Vegas over/under was on number of quarters that Bradford was going to play before he was out for the year. So, there's probably a line somewhere on this.
Yeah.
That you can bet on the first NFL coach fired. I feel like it's not that much of a stretch to do this for injuries.
Yeah, it just seems like something like this should be. Well, I think it's just because it seems like a coach getting fired is like their fault. Like they did poorly. A player getting injured is not necessarily their fault, and kind of you don't want to like bet on like an awful outcome. Okay, so I just looked up injuryreportcard.com, which is another website, or fantasyfootballinjuryreportcard.com. I have no idea sort of like if there's like science behind this. Maybe it's just a doctor. But for the 2015 season, his injury grade was a D+, which makes sense because he got injured. But I think that generally
just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. I think that generally speaking, they seem to be pretty down on his likelihood to complete a season.
I wonder what would possibly give them that sort of impression.
No idea. Next question.
I wonder if the doctor behind that is like Dr. Nick or Rodney Dangerfield's doctor, Dr. Vinny Boombots. That's the guy who's behind it.
That's probably it.
Yeah, probably. Next question is from Parker Fisher, who asks, "Is this the best version of Bradford, and should we expect a regression?"
I mean, yeah. I mean, no one is thrown for a season with a 120-plus passer rating. I think that regression is obvious and likely. I think that his career rate is something a little closer to what we're going to see, but that doesn't mean that is what we're going to see. I think we're probably going to see a pretty good quarterback because for the most part, it seems like the people who are caping for Bradford are probably right about the specific qualities and traits that we saw in him, and the people who are dogging on Bradford like me, the specific qualities that worried me. Like for example, he wasn't very aggressive in Philadelphia or St. Louis, and he didn't do a very good job of winning pressure, and a couple of other things. Well, I guess he still isn't doing a very good job of winning pressure, but he was certainly aggressive and aggressive in a big positive way. The people who were talking about specific traits that tried to ensure that Bradford would succeed, were more right because they saw what we saw in the game were those specific traits. It wasn't like a fluke performance. I mean, he just played well. But we're going to see a regression. We're not going to see, a bunch of perfect passer rating games from him. We're not going to see a bunch of 120 games from him. We may see, games where he's going to have an 80 passer rating, and that's going to be okay too. If he plays the entire season at an 85 to 90 passer rating, that's probably good enough to make the playoffs. It's probably good enough to justify, the trade. Maybe not. It kind of depends on sort of some other contexts. But yeah, he's going to regress, but that doesn't mean he's going to be bad.
Next question is from Bradley Peterson, who asks, "Thoughts on the truthers believing the offense will improve without AP?"
I'm not so sure I disagree entirely. Which it feels really hot takey, but I mean, Adrian Peterson himself as a player played better in the second game than he did the first game, which implies, of course, that because he had the sort of exact same statistics, that the offensive line played worse in the second game than they did in the first game. But I think that an offense that is just like not so doggedly committed to running the ball, just in general, is just going to be more open. It's going to be a more modern offense. I know that increases the likelihood of interceptions and turnovers, and I know that increases the variance, and for a good team, you want to decrease variance and stuff like that. But I still think that it's just more efficient to pass the ball just much more often. I think that for the most part, we don't see it borne out that a good running game helps the passing game and vice versa. I think that's going to help, and I think that honestly, at this point in their careers, McKinnon and Asiata as a combination running back duo might be a better running back than Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson played so poorly against Tennessee, and I know you'd be like, well, hey, he's played poorly in a bunch of season openers. Hey, he missed the preseason. Hey, he just needs to get some time, and that all makes sense to me. But I mean, this is like the worst that he's performed in a season opener. He hasn't been able to overcome the blocking in front of him, which I think is sort of the biggest knock. Is that Peterson right now over the past 2 games, which is not a huge sample size, but also over the past 8 games now. Just hasn't been able to overcome the blocking in front of him, and that's what you're paying him to do. I think that McKinnon and Asiata especially, have a really good, ability to overcome some of the blocking in front of them. So yeah, I mean, the offense can improve because I think the running can improve, and I think that the passing can improve, and none of that is a mark on Adrian Peterson's career, but it just might be a mark on sort of, where he's at in his career. So I mean, sorry, it sounds hot takey, but I think that's the case.
Next question is from Bradley Peterson, who asks, is Aaron Rodgers cooked? 14 straight games with a sub 100 passer rating.
Yeah, just mentioned that. I think that's likely. I think that we still need. I know 14 games is a lot. I still think we need to wait a lot. Two reasons. The first is that last season just seemed like it was just going to be a bad year for the Packers, and so just including that is not good enough. And then also Tom Brady had like 16 consecutive games that were just bad, with a couple of game-winning drives at the end, like Aaron Rodgers did. Like he had a couple of game-winning drives last year, despite bad prior performances. And that was Tom Brady, I think in 2013, I want to say. And everyone was like, Tom Brady's cooked. Not everyone, but I was like, Tom Brady's cooked. Sam Monson was like, Tom Brady is cooked. And it turns out he wasn't. He was pretty good after that. I believe he won a Super Bowl after that, on the strength of his really good play. So I want to relax a little bit. Maybe I shouldn't use that word. I want to calm down on that a little bit, but it's certainly something to watch going forward.
You're not going to do the whole Arif says relax on Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, this is maybe not the best.
Not the.
I don't want to encourage the. I don't want to send good juju their way. That's
no. I still can't wait for him to retire and the Packers to luck into another once in a lifetime quarterback to bring up the mantle of it and just have 3 straight quarterbacks that were difficult to beat. Just
They already have him. It's Brett Hundley, man.
Oh, that's right. You have to release Hundley. My bad. Tommy Gunn asks, 17 points is a season high, but does it still indicate that the offense is struggling?
Yeah, mentioned that earlier. Yeah, I think, 14 on third down, low drive success rate in general. A lot of that has to do not with their specific performance on third downs, but the number of third downs that are third and long, because of how bad they are on first down and second down. A lot of people talk about how the running game is just not that important anymore, and I agree that we need to move away from it in some respects and just be more efficient on first down and second down by passing the ball just a little bit more. But it's not completely unimportant, and I think that this is, a game where we can see that, where your yards per play running is much lower than your yards per play passing. But, because football occurs in, 3 down, 4 down situations where you have to convert a new set of downs or you give up the ball, consistent short yardage it is a good thing at times too, is over inconsistent larger yardage. So, I think there's a lot of questions about the offense. 12 points, 17 points. It's just not good enough. I know the defense is good, but some games the defense won't be good enough, and sometimes those games occur in the playoffs, and the offense needs to be able to score at least 20 points on their own. They're already getting helped by extraordinary special teams play and fantastic field position provided by the defense. So, honestly, they should be above league average, which I think is 28. And I know that points per game is not a great metric. It's points per drive is a better metric, but the Vikings are pretty bad at that too.
Yeah, it's not great. Zen Cubit asks, is it too early to buy a Diggs jersey?
No.
I used to have a theory, or I used to have a code on this, that unless the person who's playing is going to be a Hall of Famer or you're related to them, that you don't wear another man's name on your back. But I do have a Teddy Bridgewater jersey that I'm pretty proud of. So, yeah.
No, I don't think it's too early. I think
Stefon
Diggs is just doing really well.
It's too early to buy a Treadwell one.
Yeah, no, yeah, easily.
Yeah,
I don't buy rookie jerseys.
No.
Period.
Well,
my girlfriend wanted Teddy, so we bought Teddy, but that was the only one. She wanted Patterson. I said no. And remember, Patterson had a fantastic rookie year, right?
And you still held out.
Yeah, and I was just like, no, we just don't buy rookie jerseys. And she wanted to buy a Teddy one, and you know how much I love Teddy pre-draft and how much I loved him during his rookie year, and I was just like, no.
And the gushing during the draft show, I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and she's like, well, just this one time, and so the one time. But generally, I just don't buy rookie jerseys. I think it's a bad idea. We would have bought a Ponder jersey. We would have bought, a Patterson jersey. Just don't do it. But Diggs is not a rookie, and he is doing a bunch of stuff that seems sustainably good. It has been against one bad defense and one underrated defense. So, maybe wait one more game, I guess. But
wait for Carolina, and then just kind of see if he's still putting up amazing numbers.
Yeah, and he only has to put up like 75, 80 yards against Carolina before I'm like, yep, we're done, we're good. But, but yeah.
What was it? I think I mentioned it on the show in the very early days of the show that I was waiting to get into a Vikings-Lions game at the Dome, and the guy ahead of me had a. It was either the home opener or it was the second game of the season at the Dome, and the guy had a rookie Gerhardt jersey on. And
What?
it was his he I don't even think he'd done more than one play, and he had a Gerhardt jersey on, and it was almost appalling to just to see, like, wow, you are either related to this human being or you have a lot of faith.
I mean, like, I could understand, like, a Stanford Gerhardt jersey because he's an all-time great there. Should have won the Heisman that year. But, he was behind Adrian Peterson the day he was drafted, so I don't really understand, like, what this is about.
Be like, that's right up there with seeing little. Well, okay, that is fine on principle. Like, you did it. It's forgivable. Whatever. It's not something I would do, and I would mock you for it a little bit. But still. But when we went to the game last year, when you and I went, we saw. Or I forget if I mentioned it. I saw there was a guy walking around with his kids, and his kid had a Darren Sharper jersey on.
Oh, my God.
It's like, man, you could probably bring that up to the little purple trailer over there and exchange it, and they would probably do it for you. Like, just just to not have that name anywhere near our stadium.
Right, like, you just be like, yeah, it's my kid's jersey. We can't let my kid wear this. Oh, you're right. Here you go, sir.
Yeah, like, here's an AP. No. Oh, that one hit a little too hard. All right, next.
Oh my God, James.
Fine, whatever. Next question is from Drunken Vike, who asks, "Is it time to give T.J. Clemmings some time at one of the offensive tackle spots?"
No, why? Why would we do that? What is it? So what problem does it solve?
He does not elaborate since it's Twitter, but he wanted to suggest it anyway. But he also wanted to ask, Barr hasn't been seen much, but the tape and Pro Football Focus are both positive. Our offense is staying away from him.
In coverage, they seem to be staying away from him a little bit, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's filling running lanes, so he's not getting a lot of opportunity to, make a bunch of plays. I mean, he's made a couple of tackles for loss and stuff like that. He's put pressure on the quarterback. But yeah, it's just he's doing his job, and a lot of times on defense, that means that the offense is not near you because you are occupying space and are a threat to make a tackle. So that's a lot of it. I think a lot of it is just that we haven't manned up Barr against any tight ends. Like Delaney Walker's a threat at tight end. In theory, Jared Cook, because I have no idea why the fantasy community was so high on Jared Cook. I just did not get it. But they were pretty high on Jared Cook before the season. Richard Rodgers is not that much of a threat. So, though the Titans wanted to involve Delaney Walker more, a lot of times the player on him was Harrison Smith and not Anthony Barr. Obviously, Smith did a fine job in that situation. Even Captain Munderland, I think. I'm thinking of preseason play. But yeah, I think for the most part, he's just doing this job and filling lanes and stuff like that, and that's the reason that we're not seeing him. But he's playing really, really well.
All right, final question, and it's an important one. The Hoodie asks, who is going to hold Arif tight when the Vikings trade Teddy for 3 first-round picks? I think it's... I'm going to leave your girlfriend to do it, but I think Dusty is further away than I am, and I feel like there may be like a late-night call of James, I can't handle life right now. We're about to trade Teddy away. That I would consider driving 4.5 hours if there was decent beer.
No, I'll have to commiserate with my girlfriend if / when that happens.
And just blast your Spotify breakup music playlist and just relax. Maybe Song for the Dumped and just Love Hurts. Just keep it going.
Yeah.
Just keep it going. All right, that is going to be it for this episode. Later this week, we'll be bringing out our preview of the Carolina game and what we can expect from that. If we can expect Bradford to survive, if he will live through another game without losing a limb or worse, and also talk about whether or not we expect the run game to be able to go against that brick wall in Carolina. Arif, do you have anything to plug before we wrap up?
Yeah, hopefully I'll get a piece up on 1500 about the offensive line and a piece up on Cold Omaha about about Linval Joseph. Pretty soon.
You had a great piece come out. Was it today on 1500?
Yeah, it was an advanced stats rundown on the game. I'll be doing one every week that tracks sort of the advanced statistics to see sort of how the Vikings are doing relative to the rest of the league in a couple of the more indicative measures of play that we have access to now that it's like 2016 and not 2002.
I liked the comment in the first week of your column there, saying it was the most long-winded and boring thing he'd ever read. Or what was the comment? Yeah,
it was something like it was like the most long-winded and boring article I've ever read, and I was like, thank you.
Like that's actually what we're going for. So, thank you for letting me know that we hit our mark. Go team! All right, on Twitter you can find us at Arifasan NFL. That is obviously Arif and not Dusty or I. Dusty is at Dusty O'Connell. He will be back next week. He is currently on assignment in, let's say, Los Angeles. And I am at Big Mono, and I also do the Norse Code Twitter account at Norse Code DN. You can find us on the interwebs at NorseCodePodcast.com. You can also find our episodes up at the Daily Norseman, along with iTunes, Stitcher, and all sorts of little places you can get your podcasts on. So look us up there. Our RSS feed is up on the website as well. If you would like to email us, you can do so at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And if you would like to donate to the show, if you like what you've heard, if you would like to help us keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, you can do so by donating your tree fitty at paypal.me/NorseCode or go to patreon.com/NorseCode. Help us out, help us keep the lights on. We don't ask for much, just whatever you can spare. We really do appreciate it, and it helps keep us ad-free and provide content twice a week during the regular season. So, good stuff. So, for Dusty, for Arif, for myself, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening, and spoons out. We will see you later this week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.